It began with a single moment that should have been safe, routine, almost forgettable.
It's where the ocean meets the shore and life moves at a slower, more predictable pace. Because on July 18th, 1969, in Cape Cod,
A 23-year-old woman was found lying on a secluded stretch of beach, a place where people came to relax, to escape, to breathe.
And yet on that day, it became the center of a mystery that would stretch across decades, because no one knew who she was.
No one could identify her, and from that moment forward, she would be known only as Lady of the Dunes.
A name that doesn't describe a person, but a mystery. And what makes this case so deeply unsettling isn't just the discovery itself,
But the complete absence of identity. Because without a name, without a past, without connections, every question becomes harder to answer. Every lead becomes more fragile, and every possibility becomes more uncertain. So stay with me, because as we go deeper into this case,
You'll begin to realize that this isn't just about what happened on that beach. It's about how someone can live an entire life
and still disappear so completely that even their identity becomes a mystery. And by the end, you'll be left with a question that haunted investigators for over 40 years. How can someone exist and then be erased? The timeline begins with the discovery.
When a young girl walking along the dunes noticed something unusual, something that didn't belong. And when authorities arrived,
They were met with a scene that raised immediate concerns. The woman had been placed in a way that suggested intention, not accident. Details about her condition indicated that this was not a natural death, and yet, despite these signs, the investigation faced an immediate
An overwhelming obstacle. There was no identification, no documents, no belongings that could point to who she was or where she came from.
And that single absence shaped everything that followed, because identity is the foundation of an investigation. It connects a person to a location,
to a network, to a history, and without it, the search for answers becomes a search in the dark. Investigators began their work by documenting every detail, her physical characteristics, her clothing, her appearance, hoping that someone, somewhere, would recognize her.
That a missing persons report would match, that a family would come forward. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months.
and no one claimed her, no one identified her, and that silence is what makes this case so haunting, because it suggests either that no one knew she was missing, or that the connection between her and those who did know her had somehow been broken. And as the investigation continued, theories began to form. Some believed she may have been traveling, that she was passing through the area. She had no ties to the town, but others suspected she was intentionally separated from her history, living a life that left few traces. But each theory came with its own challenges, because without confirmation, without evidence, they remained possibilities rather than answers. Over the years, the case became known not by a name, but by a title.
A label that reflected the mystery rather than the person. And that's what makes this story so powerful, because it highlights for this
How identity shapes not just how we are known, but how we are remembered, how we are investigated, and how we are understood. And without it, even the most important stories can remain incomplete. As time passed, the case began to fade from public attention. But it never truly disappeared, because there was always that lingering question, that unresolved piece of the puzzle. Who was she?
Decades later, advancements in forensic science began to offer new hope, new methods, new possibilities for uncovering information.
That had once seemed lost, investigators revisited the case, applying modern techniques to old evidence, analyzing details that had been overlooked or impossible to interpret at the time, and slowly, piece by piece, progress began to emerge.
Sketches were updated, reconstructions were created, comparisons were made with missing persons databases, and while these efforts brought the case closer to resolution, they also highlighted the complexity of identifying someone after so much time had passed.
Because memories fade, records disappear, and the connections that once existed become harder to trace. But the pursuit continued.
Driven by the understanding that every person deserves to be known, every life deserves recognition, and every mystery deserves resolution. And then, after more than 4 decades, a breakthrough came. Using advanced forensic genealogy techniques, investigators were finally able to identify the woman, giving her back the name that had been missing for so long, reconnecting her to a family, to a past.
To a life that had existed beyond that beach, and in that moment, the case shifted. Because it was no longer just about an unidentified victim.
As it was about a person, someone with a story, someone whose life extended far beyond the moment of her death. But even with that identification,
The mystery did not end,
Because knowing who she was does not automatically reveal what happened to her. It does not explain how she ended up there, who she may have encountered, or what circumstances led to that final moment. And that's what makes this case so complex, because it evolves from one mystery into another, from identity to circumstance, from who she was to what happened to her.
And as investigators continued their work, they faced the challenge of reconstructing events that occurred decades earlier, working with evidence that had aged, with leads that had gone cold, with a timeline that was never fully established.
And yet, despite these challenges, the case remains open, a reminder that even after identity is restored, the search for truth continues.
And as you think about this story, consider the broader implications, because this isn't just about one case. It's about the many individuals
Who remain unidentified, whose stories are incomplete, whose lives are known only in fragments. And it raises a question, and that is both simple and deeply unsettling. How many people are out there whose identities have been lost, whose stories have not yet been told?
And as we reach the end of this journey, one question remains, the same question that has echoed since that day on the dunes of Cape Cod. I've studied the timeline, the evidence, and the missing pieces. I know what happened to Sarah.
A truth that has been hidden for decades, and until it is fully uncovered, this case will continue to stand as one of the most haunting reminders that sometimes the greatest mystery is not just what happened, but who it happened to, and that is what makes this story so unforgettable.
The idea that a person can live, exist, have experiences, relationships, memories, and yet, in the end, be reduced to a question.
A mystery that takes decades to unravel, and even then, leaves behind unanswered questions. A silence that continues to echo through time.
Reminding us that every life matters, every story deserves to be told, and every mystery, no matter how old, carries with it the possibility of truth waiting to be discovered.